Russia's Ministry of Defense 12th Main Directorate is mentioned in the media very often. Its specialists are responsible for the country's nuclear deterrent. Of course, everyone in Russia and beyond knows about Russia's advancements in the field. The Tu-160 and Tu-95 strategic bombers, Yar's ground-based mobile systems, silo-based missiles, and now the hypersonic Avangard, as well as missile-carrying submarines. But since the first nuclear warheads were put on alert, Russia's policy has always adhered to deterring aggression. Since the 1950s, one of the main components of the nation's entire nuclear doctrine has been a monitoring system to detect nuclear tests conducted around the world. Until the 1990s, this was manned exclusively by the military, but a separate service was later formed within the framework of the International Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. According to that comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty adopted in 1996 as part of the international monitoring system, Russia was to build 32 stations within its borders consisting of 3 different types: radionuclide, seismic, and infrasound. They cover several regions from the European part and the Caucasus to the Arctic, Siberia, and the Far East. In the Altai region, aspen trees swaying in the slightest of breezes are perhaps the simplest and most visual demonstration of the operational principles of 2 of the monitoring station types, seismic and infrasound. The energy wave generated by a nuclear explosion spreads over many thousands of kilometers, both in the atmosphere and through the Earth's crust. At the same time, ultra-low frequency sounds undetectable to the human ear can circle the globe several times after an explosion. All that remained was to create devices capable of distinguishing these specific disturbances from all the planet's regular background noise. The Zvezda monitoring station is about 100 kilometers from Banal. It's one of the biggest 3 in Russia, where all 3 types of station are based. We'll look at some remote monitoring points. There are usually several of them for each type of measurement, and the precise locations to build them were very carefully calculated, the sites for seismic mines in particular.
We run checks in any kind of weather because our task is to keep the station operational and to ensure uninterrupted data transfer.
All remote monitoring points operate automatically, collecting data every 2 hours and transmitting it around the clock to the regional laboratory. But because the driving principle that they work to is providing continuous monitoring, there can be no breakdowns or accidents. So regular trips into the Tiger are taken to run comprehensive checks on all systems.
Everything is working.
And this is the country's Far East. Another of Russia's main stations in the international monitoring system is near Ussurisk. We're going to the specialists who maintain the remote seismic recording points. The main criterion to consider when placing these points was that they had to be close to the surface of rocks that are part of the massive lithospheric plates.
Just how sensitive is this equipment? This building stands over a well that's 80 meters deep, with a seismic detector at the bottom. The detector won't pick up things such as me walking around or even jumping. On the other hand, it can detect a plane taking off or landing at an airfield some 50 kilometers away, and it'll even be able to identify the model of the plane.
Back in the early 1950s, Soviet scientists began to determine which points in the country where these rocks were accessible were the most sonorous. There's a sensor deep in the well that detects fluctuations in the Earth's crust. Waves from the epicenter of an explosion disperse through lithospheric plates, reflect within them as well as from the magma back up to the surface. This means that from certain places in Russia, everything happening around the world can be heard very clearly, even all the way from America's main nuclear test site in Nevada. Of course, the obvious question is, how do you tell an atomic explosion from an earthquake? Even from a wave signal on a screen, an experienced operator can say with some confidence that there's been an abnormal spike, unlike a natural occurrence. Detailed statistics on natural disturbances in the Earth's crust have been studied in various parts of the country for many decades, as well as those created by nuclear tests around the world. This allows experts to identify different waveforms by their characteristics.
There are certain criteria for identifying waves originating from man-made events, and these, together with the operator's experience of working with data in this area, allow them to identify the origin of the detected waves as a natural or man-made phenomenon, with a fairly high degree of certainty.
Norilsk is in the northernmost part of western Siberia, not far from the mouth of the Yenisei River, Dudinka and Dixon ports, and many other strategic locations along the northern sea route. Here, the deep Arctic offers some extremely convenient sites for monitoring nuclear tests around the planet.
In just 2 hours, Norilsk's weather changed at least 6 times. First it was sunny, then cloudy, then rain, then snow, and a blizzard followed. And this is nothing out of the ordinary here. We're on our way to check the seismic station.
We drive up the hill. Artyom Sirikov is a station operator and very experienced. He says the process isn't particularly complicated, but the conditions are much more challenging.
Weather conditions are extremely harsh here. You have to get used to it. We have a very long and cold winter, but that certainly doesn't stop us from doing our work properly. It builds character.
The wind doesn't interfere with the station's work, and this site was chosen because it's where a large lithospheric plate reaches up to the surface, as calculated and verified in the mid-20th century.
Monitoring stations built in various parts of the country look completely different. This one, for example, resembles a UFO that landed on a polar hill. But the most important things are inside. You can hear everything that's happening across Southeast Asia from this spot.
August the 5th, 1963, Moscow. The first version of the treaty was signed in Russia's capital. It wasn't a comprehensive ban on nuclear weapons testing yet, but at least an agreement to stop conducting them. This was the first initiative of its kind after the whole planet had lived on the verge of nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis that followed several nuclear tests. The phrase, proclaiming as its main goal the early achievement of an agreement on general and complete disarmament, was included in the treaty's text on Russia's insistence.
The most important document of our times is open for signing by other states.
However, other countries were in no hurry to sign or ratify it. The process was delayed. A number of other international summit meetings took place, and eventually the last and final version was drawn up in 1996. The Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty has been signed by 187 countries, but only ratified by 178. But the agreement never came into force because several countries, including the United States, never completed ratification. Moreover, some nuclear powers haven't signed it at all. Vladimir Putin raised the topic of possible withdrawal from the treaty ratification in early October, while talking about Russia's latest weapons at a meeting of the Valdai Discussion Club.
We act in an inverse manner, a mirror to the US. While it has signed but not ratified the treaty, we both signed and ratified it. However, the final decision is up to the members of the State Duma.
Just 2 weeks after that speech, Russia's parliament passed a bill to revoke ratification of the treaty, and on November the 2nd, Vladimir Putin signed it into law. In this way, Russia has simply put itself on an equal footing with the US that possess nuclear weapons. Nonetheless, Russia continues to fulfill all of its obligations under the treaty, including those connected to the international monitoring system. As elsewhere, seismological stations are automatic. The operator's main job is to maintain remote stations to keep them working. But even here, more than 4,000 kilometers from the most recent nuclear test in North Korea 6 years ago, a good specialist can identify one from certain telltale signs.
The longer the distance from the event, the more smoothed out the picture we see is. But we still receive it here at the station. We have seen North Korea's nuclear tests.
The second station type monitors infrasound, while seismic recording detects waves traveling through the Earth's crust. These devices, which are called daisies, record the atmospheric signatures of a nuclear explosion. Ultra-low frequency sound has very long acoustic waves that can circle the Earth several times after an explosion. These stations record those characteristic sounds. Algorithms had to be developed for seismic stations to allow data collection systems like this to work effectively. The main problem, though, was how to cut out all the extraneous sounds that fill the environment's noise spectrum. For that, an elegant technical solution was found. These daisies are a big help. They're made of thin metal tubes with built-in sensors which are sunk into the ground and specially calibrated for a specific location.
Is it a problem that a dog is barking right now? No, it's fine. It's a natural background noise.
Beyond that, these daisies are positioned in different climate and landscape zones in various regions of the country. In some places, like Altai, where there are forests, the air tube system is hard to see through the local vegetation. Elsewhere, such as Dubna near Moscow, they're fully visible as soon as they're installed and calibrated. The most important thing here is the pre-setting for ambient background sound. Conditions at the remote monitoring station near Ussurisk, which sits on lightly wooded hills, are somewhere between those found in Zvezda and Dubna.
The cleverest aspect of this infrasound station is its noise-cancelling system. But the most interesting stuff happens here inside this box. It's a microbarometer. It receives the analog signals, and then this equipment digitizes and timestamps them, while measuring wind speed and direction, as well as air temperature. All this data is then processed and sent via satellite to Moscow.
The International Monitoring System's National Data Center isn't in the capital itself, but in nearby Dubna. The most powerful servers are installed here, and duty shifts are around the clock. Staff explain that in addition to detailed knowledge of physics, chemistry, and geology, they also need to understand the latest in computer technology, and data security has been added to many times in recent years.
This place receives data from all the 32 monitoring stations across Russia. A huge screen on the wall displays all data in real time. These are processed and analyzed here before being relayed to the International Data Center in Vienna.
The analysts here don't just have to accurately identify incidents, but they also have to react promptly in emergencies.
We monitor all nuclear tests. The last one we registered was conducted by North Korea. Our center's main job is to collect data from all stations and identify certain parameters. Then we relay the data up the command chain.
Seismic and infrasound stations mean the coordinates pinpointing very powerful explosions can be calculated very accurately. But that doesn't necessarily prove that they were nuclear. For this, the third station type comes into play: radionuclide. Any nuclear explosion releases a huge quantity of various chemical element isotopes into the atmosphere. These can unambiguously be identified as man-made because they're radically different from what's present naturally. Special atmospheric equipment pumps air through a filter for a certain time, and readings are taken of the elemental particles that are captured. At many stations, atmospheric filtration points, also called Snow White, are made to a standard design. The operator comes at a designated time each day and replaces every filter. After that, the real work is in a laboratory.
This filter is later pressed and installed into the decay chamber, from which rapid radionuclides are emitted. A day later, the sample is placed in the detector to determine the presence of chemical elements. Upon request, we can send it to any laboratory in any country in the world for examination there.
The whole process of replacing a filter in the detector should take no more than half an hour. On the surface, it seems quite feasible. We're not talking about setting an Olympic record here, but it has to be done regardless of weather every single day. And some specialists like Galina Bazeyeva from Zvezda have been doing this almost single-handedly for about 20 years.
Things get difficult in winter, when temperatures here fall as low as minus 40 degrees Celsius. Tough conditions. If for some reason we fail to come here, the entire process of our work gets disrupted.
Back in Norilsk, radionuclide stations are different as they tend to be in places with very strong winds. That means ever-changing weather, but the wind is a big help. Norilsk is one of the country's biggest industrial centers. Despite emissions from local industry processing tons of rock to smelt precious and rare metals, The radionuclide station runs like clockwork with just one caveat. Unlike elsewhere, here it's indoors under a roof due to hurricane-force winds. The southeasternmost monitoring station is near Ussurisk, from where it's possible to monitor a huge area in East and Southeast Asia. And while China was the main concern back in the 1960s, this year both North Korea and Japan have come to the forefront, bearing the Fukushima nuclear power plant disaster in mind. The technical staff are mainly on hand to monitor and maintain continuity. While they transmit data automatically, like everywhere else, the radionuclide stations are unique because they can't operate without daily human involvement. For now, only a person can change the filters.
The usual geographical image of Russia is that of a vast continental country covering a good half of Eurasia. But the country doesn't end near Vladivostok or Kamchatka or Chukotka. 31 international monitoring system stations are located in mainland Russia, but the newest and easternmost one is here on the island of Sakhalin.
This is a seismological station. Construction only finished in September 2023. The newest Russian monitoring segment is in Kamchatka, the most seismically active part of the country. And its sensors are set, and they've added some engineering solutions to accommodate the terrain, such as an above-ground fiber optic line to transmit data to the laboratory.
This is the last of the 32 stations that Russia undertook to build under the international treaty, and it delivered. I'm now walking along a fiber optic communications line. Getting to the well and the seismic sensors requires walking uphill on an incline of 45 degrees. It's tough, but what to do? This is Sakhalin.
This station is currently being certified, and even though it's still in auxiliary mode, its area of responsibility covers many thousands of kilometers. Even though this is an island and an earthquake-prone area, the data is already being received in Moscow, and there have been no complaints about accuracy, which is already approaching 100%. This was confirmed by a representative international commission headed by Hyoli Perez Campos, director of the International Monitoring System, who visited Sakhalin 2 months after the station was launched.
ETS fully recognizes the importance of arriving at novel gas monitoring system that can be rolled across the Russian Federation component of the IMS. And we are aware of the difficulties of working under global constraints and that are beyond our control.
The local specialists are in constant contact with earthquake mitigation services, just as they are at all seismic monitoring stations in different regions of the country. After being received in Moscow, information is exchanged with the International Data Center in Vienna. This is cooperation that's been going on for many years, despite all the recent sanctions imposed on Russia. The international nuclear security system is still a cornerstone, and loosening it could lead to irreparable global consequences. Russia has always advocated for peaceful dialogue to limit weapons of mass destruction. This deterrence policy has always been a top priority for the country, and even now, despite the geopolitical situation, Russia continues to comply fully with its obligations under the international monitoring system.
The Russian stations of the International Monitoring System continue to carry out their functions, and the National Data Center receives this data and relays it to international data centers.
All 32 monitoring stations spread over different parts of Russia are always on duty, transmitting data around the clock on the state of the Earth's crust and atmosphere, as do more than 100 stations in other countries. And although the international monitoring system continues to operate, we have to believe that its ultra-sensitive sensors and laboratories will never record anything but natural disasters.